Across the moonlit grasslands of southern Africa, a small, armored figure moves quietly through the tall, whispering grasses. The night is warm, the air is soft with the scent of rain, and here, under the wide Botswana sky, a pangolin begins his calm, deliberate, sense-making nightly journey for food and for a life well lived in his little world. He is unhurried, unbothered, entirely at home. If you follow the gentle arc of his movement, you can almost sense what guides him: the faint heat of insects beneath packed earth, the tremor of distant footsteps carried through the soil, the subtle shift of air that tells him whether the night is safe enough to keep going. His world is shaped by signals most of us never notice, and by an ancient instinct that has kept his lineage alive for more than 60 million years. Protection is not an idea for him. It is a given, a rhythm, a shape, a way of moving through the world that has always worked. And that is where today's story begins. Because when your protection is perfected by nature, passed down across millennia, and woven directly into your body, what happens when the world around you changes faster than your instincts can? And what can we learn from that shift to live our own lives with more wisdom and steadiness? I'm Jessica Morgenthal, and this is Resilience Gone Wild, where we explore how nature's quiet brilliance can help us care more deeply for ourselves, for each other, and for the wild world we share. Today, we're walking into the gentle life of the pangolin to learn about protections, the ones we build over time, the ones we eventually outgrow, and the unexpected moments when resilience asks us to evolve, adapt, and open ourselves to help. The first storms of the rainy season soften the air tonight. The wind carries the scent of wet dust and blooming grasses, and the world feels newly awake. Nights like this always stir something in me, a quiet pull to look back, to remember the long path that brought me here. A new season is opening, and before I follow it forward, I find myself reminiscing about the life I have lived. There are 8 species of us pangolins across Africa and Asia, all sharing the same ancient blueprint. Early pangolins lived in the trees. Over 60 million years, through ice ages and shifting forests and spreading grasslands, some of us adapted to life on the ground instead. We ground pangolins are often called temminks, cape or steppe pangolins. Humans sometimes mistake us for anteaters or armadillos because we share a fondness for insects. Yet we are mammals, and our closest living relatives are actually carnivores, like cats, dogs, and even bears. Our bodies simply followed a different path. Scientists sometimes call us living fossils because we have changed so little, our slow and steady design already refined for survival. Me? I was born in a borrowed burrow my mom discovered, likely shaped long ago by an aardvark who moved on. Tucked deep in the cool earth of Botswana's grasslands, she kept me hidden while I nursed, her body warm against mine in the darkness. I began life small, around 6 inches long and weighing less than a pound, my scales still pale and soft. Since I am a mammal, I drank her milk for my first 4 months. She left each night to feed so she could stay strong enough for me. When my scales hardened after about a month, she began carrying me on her back, my little claws curled around the base of her tail. I remember the rise and fall of her steps and the scent of the night air. She taught me how to listen for danger, how to smell the world, how to understand the edges of safety. Some nights she let me toddle beside her. I climbed over roots and rocks on shaky legs and even learned the joy of rolling down small sandy slopes, gathering speed, tumbling in a blur of soil and joy. I rode on her back until I was strong enough to walk with confidence. As I grew, my armor took its shape. Pangolin scales overlap like roof tiles and are made of keratin, the same material as human nails and hair, and the hooves and horns of other mammals. Nearly a fifth of my adult weight rests in this armor. I am just over 3 feet long and close to 30 pounds now. My scales form the strongest natural armor carried by any mammal. They are my shield and my story. My senses sharpened as I grew. I cannot see far, yet I read the land through smell, vibration, memory, and instinct. My Jacobson's organ, a gift held by many other mammals, amphibians, and reptiles, helps me taste scent in the air so I can better hunt and communicate. The pads of my feet feel faint tremors in the soil. I can follow the subtle warmth of insects moving beneath packed earth. My intelligence lives in this awareness, in the way I solve small puzzles like finding the weakest point in a mound or slipping through a narrow opening. I am an escape artist too, able to find the smallest weakness in a barrier to my progress. And my special memory is especially long. I can recall a path after a single night and remember which burrows stayed cool through the hottest weeks simply by the quality of their air. Eventually, I grew strong enough to set out on my own. I am solitary, yet never lonely. My nights are filled with wonder and purpose. I share my world with aardvarks and porcupines, hares and owls, beetles and trees. We communicate in quiet languages of scent, sound, and movement. I leave messages with glands near my tail, with urine and with scraped soil. Others do the same. We read one another without gathering, without crowding, without needing anything more. My territory stretches across a few kilometers of grasses and red earth. These distances are not borders. They are memory maps. I return to the same burrows, the same mounds, the same safe paths. I mark my trails with scent so others know where I am. We rarely meet directly, and when we do, it is a silent passing, a calm acknowledgement, not a social bond. This is our way, simple, steady, ancient. My days are for sleep, often 16 hours at a time. My nights unfold with care and curiosity. A termite mound is an architectural masterpiece. Its outer crust hard as baked clay, and its inner chambers warm with movement. I use my powerful curved claws to open the surface. My extraordinarily long tongue reaches the accessible rooms. The deeper chambers stay protected by the mound's own design. They rebuild quickly. They always have. I eat ants too. They live in narrow tunnels beneath fallen logs and under loose soil. Some nights I follow their hidden passageways by scent alone, breaking only a small opening so I can reach the galleries near the surface. Ants and termites each offer their own puzzles. Each teaches me different ways to read the land. In return, my life strengthens the soil. My digging loosens packed earth. My foraging opens small air pockets. My movements turn organic material and help seeds find places to settle. The health of my burrows depends on this work. I clear old bedding. I widen passages after rains. I keep entrances open so the air inside stays cool and safe. Caring for my burrows is caring for myself. Each rainy season, new scents fill the air, speaking a language only we pangolins understand. I follow these trails, sometimes for miles, seeking a mate. We meet cautiously, a circle, a pause, a reading of posture and breath. If mating succeeds, the mother raises a single pup alone, drawing on an old well of instinct and memory. I will never know which young ones carry my scent forward. She alone will have the gift of the joys of nurturing and the responsibility too. I have lived now close to 20 rainy seasons, long for my kind. My steps are slower, yet my sensing remains strong. I can still tell which winds carry leopard breath and how distant footsteps shift the air. I still know how to move with confidence through the land that raised me. Some nights I still climb low branches to survey the grasses. Other nights, I still roll in dust to clean my scales. I feel the world with the steadiness of age. And as always, beneath everything, there is my shield, my mastery, the armor that has kept my lineage alive through shifting climates and long stretches of time. Fear rises in me as it rises in any creature. When it does, I tighten my body and curl into a near perfect sphere. My scales interlock. Softness vanishes. Instinct and intelligence work together here. Freezing, sensing, waiting. Most predators give up. Lions bat at us like toys, confused by our shape. Hyenas sniff and move on. Few can harm a pangolin once we close ourselves to the world. For more than 60 million years, this has been enough. His perfect, elegant curl protected his lineage through every kind of natural threat his world offered. His armor matched the dangers of his ecosystem. Predators who belong on this land, who hunt with intelligence and power, who move with scent, stealth, and muscle. His way of surviving was designed for these natural rhythms, and for millions of years his protections worked. Then his world changed. Human threats arrived, and within just 35 years, all 8 pangolin species across Africa and Asia have become endangered, some critically. Beginning in the early 1800s and accelerating with shocking speed since the 1990s, pangolins were swept into a trade fueled by fear of illness, desire for status, profit, and a widening human disconnection from the natural world. Across parts of Asia and Africa, people have come to believe the fallacy that his keratin scales, the same exact material as our nails and hair, hold healing power. His meat has become a luxury item. Markets have exploded. Criminal networks have formed. Demand has grown faster than pangolins can reproduce. Today, they are the most trafficked animal on Earth, and they are disappearing tragically fast. And his ancient protection, that perfect, elegant curl, it remains unchanged. When danger approaches, he trusts the instinct that kept his lineage alive. He tightens his muscles, pulls his head inward, seals himself behind overlapping scales. Against a leopard or hyena, this remains a masterpiece of defense. Against a human hand, it is tragically the opposite. Curling makes him easy to pick up. Quiet makes him easy to hide. His stillness makes him easy to transport. Fear signals him to close. Humans need him to open. This is where our resilience lesson begins. Every one of us carries protection shaped by earlier seasons of our lives. Most of them served us well at some point. They kept us steady through experiences that were real, demanding, and formative, like shutting down emotionally during conflict to stay safe, micromanaging every detail to avoid uncertainty, or keeping people at arm's length to prevent disappointment. They made sense at the time. They kept you upright. They held your world steady. Yet life moves forward. Threats change. Opportunities appear. Resilience grows when we pause to examine our own armor and question if it still serves us. What still protects? What now constricts? What needs to be strengthened, softened, or expanded? And then the deeper truth, not all threats stay the same. Not all protections should stay the same. Sometimes the world asks us to evolve faster than our instincts would choose. Thankfully, rescued pangolins in rehabilitation centers are slowly learning the difference between hands that harm and hands that heal. They are starting to follow trusted caretakers, take food from quiet palms, relax enough to uncurl, even briefly, in human presence. This is not instinct. It is adaptation born from experience, the tiniest opening toward a new kind of safety. And this is where my guest Tim Santel enters our story. Tim spent decades studying and tracking global trafficking networks for goods like rhino horns, elephant ivory, and pangolin scales, and building systems of protection for threatened species. In our conversation, he shares what it takes to save an animal whose ancient defenses no longer match a rapidly changing world, and what that teaches us about updating our own protections with intention, awareness, and community. We have an advantage as humans. We can adjust quickly. We can reevaluate. We can redesign. And this is the deeper resilience lesson. Use the protections you've built up. Re-examine them as your journey and the world changes. Strengthen the ones that still work. Retire the ones that are doing more damage than good, the ones that isolate you, narrow you, or shut you in. And when a new threat arises, one your old instincts cannot answer, choose to seek new protection rather than relying only on the familiar. Open yourself to help. For pangolins, that new protection is now human hands trying to do the opposite of harm. Hands building laws, systems, rescues, intelligent networks, and care. Sometimes resilience means opening instead of closing. This episode begins with the pangolin's instinct to curl. It continues with the human responsibility to help. And now here is Tim with his stories, realities, and insights about what can be done to protect a species who can no longer protect themselves in a human-shaped world. Welcome, Tim Santel. I am so thrilled that you are here. I have met just the most amazing people in this journey that I'm on, and Tim is up there at the top of people who have dedicated their lives with such passion, energy, and love to help save species who cannot protect themselves. I mean, no species at this point can protect themselves against humans, let's be real. And the work that you've done and that I've read about and watched and heard about and chatted with you about, I cannot wait to share.
Well, first of all, thanks, Jessica, for asking me to be part of this. I think, as you said, I had a pretty long, successful career, but it really kind of follows a lifetime of passion that I've had for animals in particular. Growing up in the Midwest in the United States, I was fortunate enough to be exposed at a very young age about the outdoors and grew a real deep appreciation for animals. And, you start thinking about these animals and you got to be a voice for them, because in fact, we'll probably talk about it later, but when I went to the Federal Law Enforcement Academy in 92, and the very first day I was there, they usually bring out an older agent to give you some advice or whatever. And there was an agent, very impressive man, big, strong, just he played the part. And he told us, he said, look, he says, when wildlife dies, it doesn't make a sound. You're the only voice it has. And that sort of stuck with me. In fact, it stuck with me so much I wrote that quote in a book, or in one of the notebooks that I had. And I carried it with me throughout my 33-year career. And I sort of still have that same philosophy that we got to try to help some of these species that are in trouble.
And we'll talk pangolins and their scales. And I know you've done a lot of work with rhinos and elephants and marine species and all those other lesser known and trafficked species, like whatever's hot in the moment is what I understand, because we're spending so much time staring at screens and not out in nature because we can get distracted doing tons of other stuff. Give us a bit about how, your life led to you really caring and wanting to be a protector and get involved in this path.
Yeah, it's, again, I think in the stories been told a few times, but I was lucky because we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and so we didn't go on lavish vacations. We didn't travel. My dad worked construction, and it was one of those things where you had to figure out something to do, and unfortunately, when you don't have a lot of money, you just gotta make your own fun. And so for me, the outdoors and particularly in the woods, that was my playground. And so that's where I kind of started. My parents have always been supportive of my passion for wildlife. As I progressed through school, a little backtrack a little bit, I guess. My dad exposed me to animals, as you mentioned, not only from his drawings. He would come home from work after a hard day of building houses, and he'd come home and take a shower and come to the kitchen table and get out some paper and say, name me an animal. And me and my brothers would name an animal, and he'd try to draw it. And it was always animal related. And then my parents told me that before I could walk, my dad used to carry me around in the woods in a homemade backpack that my mom sewed out of his old blue jeans. And he would carry me around. And so it just seemed sort of a natural fit for me. That's sort of the path that I was going to go down one day. And so throughout my, going through grade school and even in high school, everything I was doing was preparing myself to do what I ended up doing. In high school, I took Latin as my foreign language because I wanted to know what the scientific names were and what they meant. And so I thought it was important for me to have Latin. And so I'm not too sure that was the coolest thing.
You know what? I took Latin, right? I took Latin, but I did it for a different reason that didn't have the same passion. It was to do better on my SAT. So like the fact that you took Latin because you actually cared about what the Latin meant and how it could help you is so beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm with you. So I love it. Yeah, go ahead.
I figured, well, that's one thing I got to know. I got to know what these words mean, because when I go to college someday, and so that was sort of my mindset throughout the process. And then, of course, I was the first in my family to go to college. And I went to school out of state. As soon as you go out of state, I mean, that means major expense. And so again, coming from a family that didn't have a lot of money, my parents, they did whatever they had to do to make sure that I could go to school and pursue that degree.
Beautiful.
And I got my degree in wildlife ecology.
I mean, just the passion that they obviously saw in you, that this was not a flippant thing, like you wanted to pursue this at such an incredibly valuable level that they got how important it was for them to make things happen that were really hard.
Yeah, I think there's great life lessons in all those things. And I think, supporting people, helping and allowing them to pursue their dreams and their passions. And, been very easy for my parents. And I would have understood if they said, look, we can't afford for you to go to the best wildlife school in the country. But they did. They allowed me to. And that really opened up doors for me and really sort of helped me progress, over the course of the next few decades. And in fact, over time, I've got this sort of philosophy that I really believe in is, life is filled with T intersections, and you can either go left or right based on which direction you choose to go. Really can change the course of the outcome. And so, I've been very blessed and very lucky to have made a lot of good choices in my direction. And one of them being going to a really good school, pursuing my passion in wildlife by obtaining a wildlife ecology degree, and then just latching on to mentors and people that were willing to give me guidance and help along the way. When in my age, we didn't have the internet, so it wasn't very easy to find out what do you got to do? Who do you call? How do you get a hold of somebody? Well, how do you write this? And so everything was done by hand, or letters,
snail mail,
stamps, and you mail it and hope somebody actually got it and read it. But I went through that, and I think all those things sort of mold you into who you end up.
Absolutely. And what I hear from you, though, is the intentionality. I'm a positive psychologist, and there's this stress from overwhelm from too much decision making. And a lot of people struggle with, you have to choose from 10 things or 100 things. And you intentionally got down, in each of those T moments to you had a choice of 2 really good options. This is how I'm interpreting it. You narrowed it down. You did the work. You did the research. You contacted the right people. You found the right mentors. You found people who were partners and wanted you to succeed, whether it was parents or anyone else in the systems, the ecosystems you got involved in. And then I'm a silver linings obsessed person. So either one of those choices at that T moment would have led you down a path that I imagine you would have made a difference in the world and found great success in however you might define that. And the ones that you took led you to this place in life, which is, looking back, an incredibly joyful one and prosperous one. So thank you for sort of sharing that process and journey and putting in this intentionality that it wasn't flippant decisions. It was really hard work to make those decisions. And you really look back and are very proud of those choices.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I just think, as you mentioned, it was tough. It was difficult. I mean, the courses that I took I was in the same course classes as the pre-med students and everyone else. And so, but yeah, it all worked out, and I'm very thankful to have had a really good career protecting wildlife around the world. I'm pretty proud of some of the work that I did, and even more so, I'm proud of the people that I worked with and associated with. I was a manager, a supervisor. I led other agents. 19 of those years, I was a supervisor, and so I was able to mentor and help and guide others, and watching them sort of build their own paths was always kind of fulfilling for me as well. And then today, I still talk to a lot of prospective students, and I get contacted all the time from all walks of life asking for advice, whether they be career advice or school advice or decisions to be made. And I just think it's a way of paying it forward. As I mentioned, it was really hard for me to get that information when I was a kid, trying to figure out, okay, where do I go to school? In fact, real quick, true story is, I kind of found a college out of the back of an old magazine where you had the old tear-off cards, and you had to put your name and send it off and so forth. So that's sort of, obviously things have gotten a little easier from that perspective, but
Well, yes and no. I mean, easier and harder because there weren't as many choices.
yeah, that's true. I mean, that is really true. But I just think now if there's something that I can give to others to make it a little easier for them, or at least give them some guidance, that's the role that I'm playing these days.
Beautiful. I heard you tell us a vignette of a story that you had taken a side route into being a biologist in the world. And when it comes to your mentoring and advising and helping people to make these decisions of what path to follow, and for yourself, the story of the action that took the path you took enabled versus a different feeling of short-term versus long-term action, I think is really important. And if you could talk a little about how you went into the world of protection and action around protection versus so many of the other choices you likely had, that would be really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's probably different, but for me, and it's my personality, I'm a kind of a take charge person. I like to be in charge and make decisions and be responsible for those decisions. But, growing up, and as you mentioned, watching, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and then countless visits to zoos around the country and so forth, I just felt like, man, I want to go out there and I want to be a wildlife biologist. It would be so great to, study species and, radio collar and follow them around and do research. And that was the path I was on. And that's really what I thought I was going to end up doing coming out of college. In fact, I did a brief internship in Chicago where I actually worked a summer and I captured urban coyotes and put radio collars on them to determine, how the coyotes were thriving in urban areas. And so that was my path. But then I became a wildlife biologist. I actually was a an endangered species biologist for about a year. But it was during that time that it became painfully obvious to me that, okay, what I thought I wanted to do probably is not what's best for me, because it was very frustrating seeing wetlands drained, habitats cut down for parking lots or shopping centers, things happening. And as a biologist, obviously you're a little disturbed and upset about that, but there's really not a whole lot you can do other than, write some letters or make some recommendations of this or that, and then hope somebody takes action above you. And so I just felt that for me, the calling was more geared towards law enforcement. And I was fortunate enough to have worked with fish and wildlife agents in my career and developed a friendship and a relationship with them. And they were encouraging me to become an agent, but I really thought I wanted to be a biologist. But then as I mentioned, as I went through this process, I'm like, if I'm an agent, I can actually, when I see bad things happening to the animals, there's things that I can actually do about it, And so I decided to flip the script on my career plans and pursue becoming a special agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And, that sounds like a pretty cool and easy thing to do, but it's not. I mean,
well, it doesn't necessarily sound easy because we grew up in the James Bond early era, right? And, the influences I'm going to speak for us a little bit in growing up in America during the times of where zoos were not about protection. Right. It was not yet a time where they were protecting and saving endangered species and from extinction. It was small cages where you were just watching the animals. You didn't make the same connection. And that little lens through Wild Kingdom was it's a small one, right? And Jacques Cousteau was sort of just getting started teaching us about what was going on in the oceans. And you're happening upon the wildlife agents and having an experience, getting to know them was probably quite rare to get that opportunity to even know that existed. And at the same time, this coolness of the spy and the investigation, and I think feels like a good draw, for all your interests, but you were probably quite unique. There weren't too many of you out there who got this whole picture of the opportunity.
Yeah, truthfully, I didn't even know about fish and wildlife agents throughout the journey until, I became involved with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that was my first exposure to them. And then when you start seeing back up a little bit, I guess there were a number of, back in the 80s, Fish and Wildlife Service created what they called special ops. And this was an elite group of undercover fish and wildlife agents. And these guys made some, world global headline type cases that you would see on CBS Late News with Dan Rather or some other of these shows back in the 80s. And for me, this is kind of how maybe nerdy I was about wildlife is I would record all those news clips and such on an old VHS recorder, a VCR. And I kept I just kept cataloging them, and to this day I still have them. But they did these phenomenal cases like Operation Citizen, Operation Renegade. There's Operation Whiteout.
Give us one of the stories.
Well, for example, Operation Whiteout was done in Alaska, and it was an undercover business that was concentrating on the illegal trafficking of walrus, and particularly for their walrus ivory. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service set up a covert business, operated in Alaska for a considerable period of time in undercover, and through that investigation actually had some firsthand footage. And this was what really kind of stuck with me is an agent by the name of Bob Standish was the agent at the time there, and he actually got footage of the Alaskan natives on a walrus hunt, and it wasn't the traditional hunt that most of us would think. This was high-powered weapons where they just basically shot everything in sight. So there was all this carnage and the bloody scene of all these walruses falling off the ice and into the water, and many of them were still wounded or whatever and getting away, and so a lot of them weren't actually even collected. But that story was one of many that I recorded back in the day, and it really had an impression upon me. And I'm like, wow. That Standish and agents like him just were able to really make a huge case and bring a worldwide attention to something that none of us would have ever known. And so fast forward, when I had the opportunity to become an agent, those were sort of the driving things in my mind was like, I want to make cases like that one day. I want to be just like Bob Standish or the other agents that were in the special ops. And so I, you got to start off somewhere. And so I started off.
And you got to have a dream.
Yeah. And I started off, my first role with Fish and Wildlife was as a wildlife inspector. And then I became a endangered species biologist, but it was sort of to lead me to the special agent role and then sort of mimic and sort of hope to one day do the job that those guys were doing. And, proud to say that eventually happened. And not only did I work pretty much undercover was sort of my niche for the Fish and Wildlife Service over the 30 years. The last 10 years, I actually ran the country's special operations unit. And so I was in charge of that unit, and I was able to build it myself and bring people in that shared a similar passion and expertise in working undercover. And so, full circle, it ended up that all those tapes I recorded on my mom and dad's VCR and it sat
now
there.
Now we're recording you. See, telling the story.
I was able to have a lot of those same sort of moments myself. So, which is kind of cool.
Just in terms of a path, the change in, I've read and I'm so disturbed by the change in the challenges to so many species from modern technology, from the change in speed, the change in scope, the change in, so when you started, if I understand it right, you were probably doing more local and regional and state and then nationwide work. And then it transitioned to a much more global scale where the movement of live and dead, whole and parts of what was becoming endangered species was moving through these networks that you were in charge of, that you were working in blocking and stopping and whatever, and that these are like huge cartels. I don't think most people have any sense of what's involved here. As we keep hearing about guns and drugs in these global cartels that are so driven by economics, that this wildlife trade is so much bigger and so much more horrid because you're dealing with living beings that will disappear. Like it's a completely different scale and scope and impact. But it's all for the same reasons, right? This is an economic game, a global game. So you want to talk to that in terms of the protections that are needed now and that are possible.
Absolutely.
It makes it worse and it makes it easier, yeah.
when I was young, I had no concept of the extent or how large, wildlife was used and trafficked and for what. I mean, I was just a poor kid living in the country in the middle of the United States, hanging out in the woods, and I didn't know about, endangered species and other things being killed for products. And
hey, I wasn't a poor kid living in New York City, and I didn't know about endangered species. So I think it's a matter of what you pay attention to, right?
I never saw ivory. I never saw, my mom never had furs or reptile skin handbags or any of that kind of thing. I mean, so to me, I just never really put two and two together that people were killing animals for parts and products. And then I got exposed to that when I became a wildlife inspector, and that sort of opened my eyes like, holy moly, there's a lot of stuff here that's being imported and exported out of the country. Some of it, a lot of it is done, quote, legally, and I use that sometimes in air quotes, but it's done with the proper procedures and permits and so forth. And so there's a huge just legal trade in wildlife products alone. But then you start finding out about all the illegal stuff that's out there, and it's just sort of mind-boggling. And what's really kind of changed over my career is when I started, we didn't have, like I said, we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have those sort of things at our disposal. And so it was more traditional, and you did work, more local and regional species. But as kind of putting things in context, in the 1970s, in 1972, the Endangered Species Act was passed, that was sort of the revolution of a number of wildlife and environmental protection type of pieces of legislation that were passed. And it coincided with, so now we're like, well, okay, we have the Endangered Species Act. Well, then came CITES, and there was these new laws and regulations and pieces of legislation on the books. And CITES was an international treaty which brought it.
Just what do the initials stand for?
It's the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, and it's an international treaty that was signed shortly after the passage of the Endangered Species Act. And it's a treaty amongst, currently I think there's about 180 something countries that are signed to this treaty. But it basically is an agreement amongst all countries to help regulate the trade in wildlife. And for those species that are facing or in jeopardy of becoming extinct or their populations are vulnerable or whatever, there's certain limitations or outright bans on trade of these certain species. And so, but that was all happening. And so that sort of initiated this awareness to, well, there's more than just the white-tailed deer here in the United States or a grizzly bear in out west, where there's also these other animals such as the gorilla in the Congo or the rhino in Zimbabwe or orangutan in Indonesia. And so it brought this awareness to other species, and maybe there's a bigger need to protect them globally as opposed to just worrying about what's in your immediate vicinity. And so, but I think so we were always kind of sort of aware of this, but again, without the internet, it's kind of hard to learn about that stuff, and learn about all these different species and how their populations were possibly dwindling and so forth. And so, the internet came around, and, as for every positive I can say about the internet as it applies to wildlife, I could equally say there are certainly a lot of negatives. And, when it comes to wildlife trafficking, the advent of the internet really perpetuated this just overwhelming demand for wildlife. Again, when I started, if I'm sitting in the middle of the United States and I want a baby, I want to buy a baby chimp, I wouldn't know the first thing.
First of all, you wouldn't even think of it. It wouldn't ever occur to you first, right?
Let's say you said, hey, when I saw that in a zoo and I really want to have one, you wouldn't know how to go about it. Today, with the internet and the ease that there is in finding these things, just a couple clicks and you can find anything you want. You can negotiate with people. You never have to meet them face to face. You can negotiate. You can pay online. And then in a couple days, the thing's sitting on your doorstep. And it's that fast and that. So through my career, I had to evolve, and as the other agents had as well, we had to evolve into how do we work investigations involving international, because now animals weren't just being sold within countries, because now I could easily get something from Southeast Asia or Africa or Europe or wherever the case may be and have it at my doorstep. So it sort of forced us to start thinking globally and to start working international investigations. And then as you know, criminals are good at, they determine what's the easiest way to make money, the less risk. And so, you know, criminal syndicates, criminal organizations, just bad guys have figured out that the wildlife trade is the way to go. I mean, and so if you're a bad guy and you want to make a lot of money for yourself and the people within your organization, you're going to deal in wildlife, illegal wildlife, because there's a lot fewer officers. The penalties have nowhere near grown to the extent where they create a deterrence, and so the risks are low. So the risk of getting caught are low. And even if you get caught,
and the punishment is...
punishments aren't anything like you would think they should be. And so what has happened is these criminal organizations that may have been involved in, you know, narcotics or weapons trafficking, human trafficking, and so forth, they're now also dabbling in wildlife. And so we call that a convergence. And it's a convergence of all these different criminal interests. And so, you know, whether they be guns, drugs, weapons, or people, or wildlife, the bottom line, it's all about making money. I mean, that's the kind of the driving commonality between all of those, is the goal here for the bad guys is to make money.
And it's the same systems, like as you described, right? Like it's transportation, it's traffic, it's money movement. Like it doesn't matter what you're selling. But the interesting part, you know, to me and to you, because obviously you got into this world, is that we humans pay attention to other humans. So there's the hype of the information that you get about and the impact on what's right in front of you short term of drugs, guns, maybe human trafficking. We don't see that, you know, as we sort of other those who are, we don't see, right? But that it's more visible than the long-term impact on species that are trafficked. So, you know, for us to understand how many pangolins, you know, the impact on this incredible species that is the most trafficked species that people probably have never heard of in Western cultures, but in Eastern cultures, they're part of established pharmaceutical advisories and books. And I know there's some movement on changing some of that. It's still there, but we don't see that short term, which is all we kind of care about these days, right? Is that there's a short-term impact matters when we cull and endanger and make extinct whole species, because it doesn't hit us right away. We can't have an alligator bag, God forbid, and can't make a certain medicine that has that recipe. But it doesn't hit as hard as the immediacy and the incredible attention that's paid to guns and drugs and things that affect humans immediately. But long term, the ecosystems are collapsing. You know, the endangered, it's partly trafficking. It's partly that, you know, the economics also drives rainforests to turn into palm oil factories. You know, climate change is shifting the availability of and human need for land, for more and more land and for housing and forests and whatever. Anyway, so, you know, the challenges on these species is just exponentially growing, and it's not in our sight. So how do we bring that need for us to become protectors of not just humans, but of our natural world to be more important?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think, you know, the thing, as I mentioned, these bad guys doing these crimes, it doesn't matter if it's a kilo of coke or you know, a case of illegal rifles, or if it's at pangolin scales. I mean, they all are seen as a commodity and a way to make money.
Yeah.
And they view these as a commodity and not necessarily as a living being. The problem is, you know, you can destroy guns, you can destroy the drugs and whatever, but once that animal is killed, it's gone forever. And so it's a different dilemma. And so that's why we're seeing, you know, populations dwindle and habitats being fragmented and all the other things, is because we're treating these animals and when we say wildlife, that also includes fish and plants and marine and so forth. But
Yeah.
when we take all that and just use it as a commodity, and they believe it's not as a quick replaceable item. It's just not. I mean, many of these things, many species take years and years for them to become sexually mature enough to breed, and maybe they have long gestations, maybe they have small litter sizes.
Yeah.
So all these things play into this dynamic, and so when you're taking more out than can be replaced, you see the populations go down. And so with the pangolins, I mean, you mentioned the pangolins. Pangolins are the most trafficked mammal in the world. I believe there's probably been, anecdotally, you hear numbers, but they say there's over 1 million that have been trafficked in the last decade. I do know, I currently work for, or I'm teamed up with a nonprofit called Focus Conservation, and we work with wildlife crime units throughout Africa, and we help create and mentor these crime units to do the criminal investigations. Basically, we're there to help them work investigations concerning wildlife trafficking. And we do see a tremendous number of pangolins that are being trafficked in Africa. There's 4 species of pangolin in Africa. There's 4 species of pangolin in Asia. They're all protected and either considered threatened or endangered. They're all CITES species, so their trade
sadly, because they're so staggeringly endangered.
Yeah, I mean they're all protected, but that doesn't stop this global appetite for these pangolins. And the part that's really kind of disturbing is these are like some of the most coolest animals there are. They wouldn't seemingly hurt a fly, and
they have so much innate protection that has helped them survive for millions of years. I mean, they have this full body of scales. They roll up into a ball, which makes them easier to pick up and to transport by humans. But it helps them. It's helped them for so long to protect themselves. They hide deep inside holes underground so they can stay out of the way. They seem to be smart. I mean, they're clearly super sentient because I've seen the interaction between them and humans. I mean, they know what they're doing. No matter, the rhino and the elephants with their horns and their tusks and their thick skins and their size, like these are animals that should not be endangered. These are animals that have survived for so long. Whale sharks, they're huge and they have the thickest skin in the entire animal world. And these are the species that somehow humans just get past the protections, these incredible protections they built them for themselves and adapted over millennium. And they need us. God, go with that. Yeah.
The pangolins, I mean, you talk about resilience. I mean, they've evolved throughout the hundreds of millions of years, with these scales. And as you mentioned, they roll up into a ball, and that's been their self-protection for centuries. And now, the fact that they are docile, they just kind of curl up in a ball, and it sort of leads to their detriment because, as you said, that they're easy to pick up. People
they don't make any noise. That's
they're not going to bite you. I mean, they're
not going to call attention to themselves, right?
No,
in terms of the trafficking.
They're just, and so they're kind of, it's really a kind of a sad deal as far as pangolins go. I mean, what we're seeing in the trade, I think Focus Conservation was started in 2018, so we can only speak for what's happened basically in the last 7 years. But in the last 7 years, I think we have seized over 4,300 kilos of pangolin scales. And then when you started figuring out...
Just to give a sense of that, the scope. I mean, these are small and they don't weigh very much.
No, it's kind of like...
and how many animals have to die?
It's like a guitar pick about the size of a silver dollar. I mean, they're like large guitar picks. But it takes, and oh gosh, I don't know the actual number off the top of my head, but it's 20, 30, 40 pangolins to make a kilo. So when you have 4,300 kilos of these scales, you multiply that by the number of the numbers are just staggering as far as that are being killed. And they're being killed for not only their scales. I think that's sort of a byproduct. It's also it's a cultural thing. Pangolin is eaten in some of these countries. It's a meat source. It's bush meat, and so not only do people kill them for eating meat, but when they do kill them, then obviously they take advantage of the fact that these scales are also in demand, particularly in Southeast Asia, where a lot of this stuff ends up going for cultural reasons there, as well as the traditional Chinese medicines. And so pangolin scales are used in a variety of ways, but they're killed, they're easily captured, they're killed, they're eaten, and their scales are sold. And what typically happens is there's these syndicates or these groups will have, they'll have hunters out there, and then there's just a series of people that these scales get filtered through different layers in these organizations. And then you have brokers who are buying all these scales, and then you got people that transport them, and then they got them, and then they ship them, and you got people on the other end. And so there's a bunch of different
and
levels.
Everybody has to make more and more money, so they become incredibly valuable.
That's kind of how it works. And then at the end users, pay a heck of a lot more than what that trapper did in the wild there in Nigeria, what he got paid. And, it's pennies on the dollar, and in fact, it kind of reminds me, I've done a lot of some pretty cool cases. A lot of them were dealt with elephant ivory or rhino horn or so forth. And I ran one of the biggest wildlife investigations ever here in the United States, called Operation Crash. And Operation Crash was a case that we did that centered on the trafficking of rhino horn. And in the initial phases of that investigation, and that investigation was truly pretty remarkable as far as the number of people that we were able to prosecute. I think we prosecuted over 50 people. We had 40 separate investigations going on. We identified over 1,000 potential targets. We were rocking and rolling on this, but one of the things that struck me was early in that investigation, there was a group of, you talk about criminal organizations, there was a group out of Ireland. They came from a town in Ireland called Rathkiel. And they were referred to as the Rathkiel Rovers, but they are sort of a gypsy clan that would figure out how they could make money. And they figured out that they could make money on rhino horns. And in addition to all the other sort of scams and things that they were working on, rhino horns was one of them. And the long story short is they would send out members of their organization out to places to either steal, in some cases, like in Europe, where we saw approximately 100 or so museums broken into where the rhino horns were stolen off the displays. But here in the United States, they started sending some of their people here in the United States to try to buy rhino horn from either old mounts or zoos or collectors or whatever the case may be. And so they started coming here, and a couple of them actually ended up coming here, and we did a fairly lengthy surveillance and investigation on it. But where I'm going with this is those Irish came into Texas and tried to secure and buy 4 endangered black rhino horns. And of course, coming from Rathkiel, Ireland, and being Irish and having the kind of dialect that nobody understands but Irish, they were turned away. You imagine them showing up in Texas.
I got to put my subtitles on when I'm watching the Irish shows, so I get it. Like, I don't understand what they're saying.
They went to Texas to buy rhino horn, and these Texans were like, get out of here. We're not selling this stuff to you. But they were black rhinos, and they were endangered. And so the Irish, though, I got to give them credit. They went out and they found a local homeless man, and they paid him and convinced him to go in and make the buy for them. And they proceeded to buy, and he went in and bought those 4 horns on their behalf for $28,000. And so that was sort of the base rock bottom price on that. But, those horns that were sold for $28,000 then were brought to New York, and they were sold to a Chinese national, and they were sold for $50,000. And then that Chinese national sold them to someone that was going to smuggle them into the and they were sold for $80,000. And then the smuggler was agreed to bring him to Hong Kong, and he got paid $108,000 for those same 4 horns. And so in a matter of a few weeks, the horns went from Texas to Hong Kong. It went from $28,000 to $108,000. And so that sort of illustrates sort of how this works with wildlife. Every hand in the pot makes a little profit. And the same goes with the pangolin. Each time those scales would pass through the process, the price would go up. And so, again, the trapper who's living in Nigeria and probably getting paid pennies for that pangolin, by the time it got over to Southeast Asia, it was worth many, many times the value of that animal when it was first killed.
Yeah, it's a very sad. And each one of these investigations leads to the same process, the multiple layers, the covert underground sort of stuff that happens, and people don't care as much about the animals. I'm just thinking about the whole protection and the role that you play in looking at these systems of illegal trafficking, but much worse. I know there's a lot going on with rhino horns. I don't know what's going on with pangolins on this end, but I've seen some of your challenges to some of the processes with this, raising rhinos and taking their horns and raising elephants for collecting of these illegal to try to change the market dynamics. And, we as humans are trying to protect. I have to give my mantra in life is I give people credit for doing their best in the moment with the information they have and the incentives that they have and the people that they're working with and all that. And in terms of our role as humans, to protect wildlife in these systems that you've described and that we've talked about. What are you thinking? Like, what do we need to know and do better that somehow the listeners and I can get involved and do something positive for this process? For this is not getting smaller. This problem is getting bigger. So what do we do?
There's a lot of people that really mean well. But majority of these people they don't have sort of the same firsthand experiences per se. And so you see a lot of internet, suggestions and advice and opinions. Everyone's a keyboard warrior out there trying to solve the global effort on wildlife trafficking by, sitting in their basement. I get a little frustrated because I see so many of these posts, and it's the same post. It's just different group, different people, but it's the same post. But they also lose focus of the people on the front lines, and I think that's where we could do a much better job. It's not, academia is not going to solve this problem.
This whole hierarchy of us versus them and our permission to extract and destroy and take for our advantage. Like, we have to change this. How do we do this? How do we change the mindset so that we want to protect, not extract and destroy?
Unfortunately, it's not something that's going to be solved overnight. It's got to be it's bringing in awareness. It's doing what I continue to do, doing what you're doing with the podcast, doing what others are doing, and even the social media people that are doing their posts and stuff. It's bringing this awareness, but we have to we really need to understand that these are living species that once they're gone, they can't be easily replaced. When you see species declining, when you see, species go extinct, that's pretty sad. I think inherently people love animals and think all people love animals for the most part. I've not met a lot of people that just absolutely hate animals. I mean, people love animals, but I think people either intentionally or unintentionally are sort of naive to what's going on. And they kind of just live in their own space, and they're not worried about some species in Vietnam that's almost gone, or the fact that something down in Belize is on the verge of extinction because it doesn't affect them. But my point being is, I think people need to sort of have an awareness and take a deeper interest. I would encourage you to get out there and getting the young kids involved in the outdoors and away from the screens is probably one of the ways we're gonna hopefully be successful in this global effort to protect some of these species. I want to say also to you, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk. I think telling my story to make people aware that you can come out of the middle of nowhere, you can come from meager means, you can make some mistakes along the way. But at the end of the day, if you keep pushing forward and quote, if you're resilient in your efforts to pursue your passion and your dreams, and if everybody makes a little bit of a difference, hopefully we can hopefully save a few species.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tim. What a joy. Thank you. Keep looking forward to keeping in touch.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have just crossed from the deep quiet of the pangolins world into the fast-moving systems Tim knows so well: trafficking routes, shifting tactics, and protections that must evolve as quickly as the dangers. When these two worlds collide, something powerful becomes clear. Resilience is about how we respond when the present asks us to evolve. Tim helped us see this with clarity and force. He reminded us that many species become vulnerable when human systems evolve faster than natural instincts can adapt. Pangolins are one of the clearest examples. Their brilliant defense kept them safe for 60 million years. Then, in a single human generation, the pangolins' protections no longer matched the dangers around them. Tim spoke about what it takes to meet threats that keep shifting, as he described working undercover, tracking global networks, and guiding international teams. One theme echoed through everything he shared: threats do not stay static. And because of that, our protections cannot stay static either. This is the part of the Resilience Gone Wild story for us. We cannot keep relying on protections we built decades ago. The instinctive behaviors that helped us survive earlier hardships, earlier relationships, earlier versions of our own lives. The world changes too quickly. Our lives change too quickly. Resilience requires us to update our internal systems with intention, clarity, and courage. So take a moment with the questions we explored earlier. What protections still serve you? What now constricts you? Where can you soften? Where can you strengthen? Where can you open? If you're wondering where to begin, here are 2 specific practices to explore this week. First, revisit one old protection. Choose one behavior you developed long ago to help you stay safe or steady: withdrawing emotionally, staying silent to avoid conflict, overworking so no one could criticize you. Then ask yourself, what danger was I protecting myself from then? Is that danger still here now? Your answer will show you whether this protection needs to be kept, softened, or redesigned. Second, identify a new threat and name a new protection. Look for one part of your life where the challenge has changed, yet your response hasn't. Maybe the expectations at work have increased, yet you still try to do everything alone. Or a relationship has become safer, yet you continue to brace for criticism. Ask yourself what fear is driving this reaction, and what would a healthier form of protection look like now? These practices strengthen your internal reserves, the reserves you draw on when life shifts unexpectedly. They help you stay adaptable without abandoning the protections that still serve you. And as we reflect on our own protection, we return to the pangolin, the teacher at the center of today's story. We've learned that pangolins are disappearing rapidly. Some species are not critically endangered. Their habitat is shrinking, and their bodies are being trafficked for the false belief in the healing power of keratin scales and the demand for luxury meat. Their instinct to curl no longer keeps them safe. They now depend entirely on protections built by humans who care enough to act. Organizations like the Pangolin Crisis Fund, the World Wildlife Fund, and on-the-ground wildlife crime units are working every day to dismantle trafficking networks and strengthen enforcement. Supporting them makes a real difference. Raising awareness, refusing to purchase products linked to wildlife exploitation, advocating for stronger protections, and sharing accurate information all help protect a species that cannot protect itself from human harm. Change begins with attention. Action begins with care. Every choice we make becomes part of the protection these animals and the many endangered trafficked species urgently need. If today's episode moved you, if it opened something, deepened something, or helped you see your own protections in a new light, please share it with someone who might benefit from re-examining their own. And please also follow, rate, and review Resilience Gone Wild. All these actions help the stories reach more people who may truly need them. You can find all our past episodes, extended clips, resources, and resilience practices at resiliencegonewild.com. And you can always reach me there. I love hearing how these stories take root in your life and how nature is shaping your resilience journey. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for choosing to engage with the wild wisdom around you. Until next time, stay open, stay safe, stay wild.